Hi friends! My first order of Simon Says Stamp Stamptember goodies came in the mail, and I wanted to make my first project using them with you. The first thing is the Etched layered daisy dies, which are two pieces that make up one large flower that's absolutely beautiful. Then I got the painted leaf stamp and dies, which is my first layered stamp set, and I love that they're all labeled so it's easy to tell which layers go together. The last die set I have isn't from Stamptember. It's the small script 2 wafer dies from the August release, and I decided to use two of the words together to make up my sentiment. I pulled out my shipping box turned splat box because I wanted to work with my Tim Holtz distress sprays today. I'm working on Strathmore cold press watercolor paper and spraying an oxide spray in the color peeled paint onto the paper dry to start. Once I had some color down, I sprayed clean water onto it so that any other layers I added would move around a little bit more. I went in with more of the peeled paint, and I also went in with some vintage photo and the regular distress spray stain. The oxides and the stains definitely behave very differently, and if you want more information on that, I would definitely check out Tim Holtz videos on his channel because he goes into some amazing explanations and demonstrations on how they work and how you can layer them together. That's kind of where I got the idea to start playing around with these. It's great inspiration. I decided I wanted to give this daisy more of a sunflower feel. So I went in with the water first to get my colors moving more, and I added in wild honey oxide spray over the whole piece before layering in carved pumpkin and fired brick, but I kept those in more contained sections because I knew I wanted each half of my paper to be different so I could die cut a layer from each side. I also added some of the new Mica stain and flickering candle for a touch of shimmer and then dried everything with a heat gun. Then it was time to break out the die cutting machine. I put each flower through once and the leaf die 3 times. Anytime I die cut something that I've inked, I always add a sheet of printer paper on top to protect my plates. This makes sure that the ink won't transfer from the plate to another project down the road. Let me tell you, it only takes one time to learn that lesson well. I decided that I wanted the center of my flower to be a different color, so I grabbed a scrap piece of watercolor paper and sprayed vintage photo stain and antique bronze mica stain onto it and dried it as well. Then I die cut the top flower layer from that and set it aside to grab some distress ink cubes so that I could add some more definition to everything with ink blending. I used my distress ink swatch chart to pick a few colors that would give me some depth for each piece. I know between the sprays and the inks I used a lot on this project, but all of the supplies and the colors I used will be listed in the description box below. I used a dome blending foam to blend on some ground espresso to the centerpiece to help darken it up, and then I actually cut off the petals, leaving just the round center part to layer on later. I love that you have the option with this die to keep it all one color or really change it up depending on what look you're going for. Then I added in fired brick and aged mahogany to my flower pieces, starting from the center and working my way out. I kept holding them up against each other to see where I was until the contrast was where I wanted it to be. This set is so versatile. It could literally be for any season or occasion that you want. As I was making this, I just kept thinking of more color combinations that I want to try out. I also want to try coloring the petals with Copic markers because I think that's probably going to be beautiful too. I just love things like this that inspire me to think outside the box and play with different supplies that I already have. This set is definitely a 10 out of 10 for me, and I'll be getting a lot of use from these dies. Alright, back to the card project. I decided to add a layer of foam tape between my two main flower pieces for added dimension, and then adhered the brown center piece on with liquid glue so I could make sure everything was lined up. Then it was time to get my leaves ready. I had to poke out the little sections of die cut from in between, and some of the printer paper I had used managed to stick itself to the back of my watercolor paper, so I just made sure that all of those were removed as well. I prepped the stamp to add the veining onto the leaves by running my fingers over it to remove that coating that most new stamps have. Then I stamped it onto the die cuts with distress ink. I didn't mind if the image wasn't perfect because these are already pretty splattered and messy anyway. I know technically I skipped a stamping layer with these, but I love that you can add the veins to the large solid leaf stamps or straight to the dies or combine all of them together. I then went in with the same ink and added some shading to the edges of the leaves, which really helped to add more interest to them, and I feel like it gave more of an autumnal feel to the whole piece. Next I took a piece of My Favorite Things craft cardstock that I die cut with a stitched rectangle die and layered it onto a piece of wood grain cardstock. I really think the wood grain adds more of a rustic fall feel, and this could easily be done with a wood grain stamp as well. I really wanted my die cut sentiment to match the tone of the flower, so I used some of the same ink colors to blend onto a scrap piece of cardstock that I cut the words out of. I also cut a second layer from a scrap of plain brown cardstock so that I could layer them together to make them feel a little more substantial, since that font is so delicate on its own. I used small dots of liquid glue on the plain brown cardstock letters to allow me to adhere the ink blended ones on top and adjust them until they were lined up nicely. With layering dies this thin, just make sure you take your time and be gentle so that you don't change the shape of the paper. Then it was time to glue down the flower, and I used my liquid glue so that I would have enough time to make sure I was happy with the placement and make any adjustments needed. I added glue to each of the leaves as well and tucked them under the petals, creating more of a triangular shape that fit nicely into the corner of the card base. When I had added the foam tape between my flower layers earlier, the ink blending I had done was not dry, and so the tape was not sticking well. I added liquid glue to either side of the foam and then placed an acrylic block on top to hold it down while it dried. I know looking back that I should have just let the ink dry to begin with, but I was just so excited to see how this card was going to turn out. I don't think you can really blame me, right? With how simple the top half of this card was, I thought it was worth it to make sure that everything was nice and straight, so I grabbed my T-square to help me glue down my sentiment. And again, I went in with little dots of liquid glue on the back of the die cuts and made sure that I didn't press anything down firmly until I was happy with the placement. I really love the shimmer that those mica sprays added to the flower, but I thought this card could really benefit from some more bling, so I brought out my roasted coffee sequin mix from Possum Stamps to add a little bit of sparkle. Normally I try to stick with an odd number of embellishments, but for this card I thought that 2 clusters of 3 sequins each on either side of the flower would be really pretty, and mostly still follows the idea about odd numbers being more appealing to the eye. I also had a lot of fun tucking some of the sequins under parts of the petals and the leaves so that it was kind of like peeking out from underneath. I thought that was very cute. I scored a side folding card base and decided to do something that I almost never do. I added a sentiment and images to the inside of my card. To be super transparent with you, I would say that maybe only a quarter of the cards I make actually get attached to a card base. Most just get left as front panels, and it's a problem I'm really trying to work on. For my inner sentiment, I grabbed my Simon Says Stamp Tiny Words support set that came out last year, and I used the stamp that says, "Reaching out to say I love you," since I liked how that tied in with the Hello Love on the front of my card. But this set has some other really amazing sentiments like, "You are enough," "I hear you, what you have to say matters to me," and one of my personal favorites is, "I see you, you matter." This set hits me right in the feels every freaking time, and I'm so glad that I have it in my stash. I stamped the sentiment in Lawn Fawn's Crunchy Leaf brown ink to try to tie in some of the color from the front of the card, since that card base was such a stark white. I also wanted to bring in some of the layering stamps from that Painted Leaves set, and this time I did use the main base layer of stamps for 2 of the leaves, inking them up with a few layers of Shabby Shutter's Distress ink, and then adding in the veining with the Forest Moss ink, just like I did on the die cuts before. I really liked the distressed and rustic feel that this ink gave to these images, but if that's not your style, you could easily swap this out for your favorite dye ink for a smoother finish. I think I'm really going to push myself to start adding in more stamped image accents on the inside of my cards, even if I don't add a sentiment right away. I think it's such a cute addition, and it really helps to pull everything together. Maybe this will even help me be better about sending out actual cards, since they won't just be front panels sitting in a box. Leave me a comment and let me know. Do you always finish your card completely, or does anyone else out there have stacks of card fronts waiting for their card bases? I can't be alone here, guys. I lined up my card base and front panel using the corner of the Misty so that everything was nice and flat, and then this card was complete. I really had a blast playing with all these inks and sprays, and I can't wait to use these dies again to see how different I can make them look. I really appreciate you hanging out with me today, and make sure you subscribe because next Saturday, September 18th, is the start of October Eve, a Halloween card series that I'll be posting 13 days in a row leading up to October 1st. Saturday's video may just have a special treat that you won't want to miss. Until then, I hope you have a great day and happy crafting.